up. She said, are there spies in here? Everyone is welcome. Huh? Et des membres d'industrie, c'est une question. Là, je dirais très question. Okay. Well, it's a real pleasure. My name is Susie Walsh. I am the current but outgoing executive director of USC Canada. How many of you have heard of USC Canada? Good. Most of you work for USC Canada. So we're probably one of Canada's oldest NGOs, and our main focus is food sovereignty work with farmers both in the North, South, and now in Canada as well. I'm really happy to be here to introduce some pretty important speakers this afternoon, people who are taking a very courageous and leading role in trying to identify what is happening out there in terms of corporate concentration and how it's affecting our food system, as well as those who are actively engaged in really fighting back, pushing back, and promoting a much healthier and a more sane food sovereign system. Our first speaker today, unfortunately, is unable to be here because his daughter had an abscessed tooth, which you know is a last-minute thing, and so he's attending to his parenting role. And this was Devlin Kuya, who is with the organization BRAIN. He was going to talk to us a little bit about his research with respect to the corporate concentration of the food system, and particularly link it to some of the trends with respect to land grabs. However, we have two other excellent panelists who get to have a little bit more time now. Aisha Dodwell, I'm going to introduce both of them now, and the second part I'll introduce the other speakers for that part when we get to part two. Aisha is the Campaigns and Policy Officer at Global Justice Now, and they work on campaigns that touch food, energy, and trade issues. And she previously worked with the international humanitarian organization Résistances, and has also done some lecturing at Kingston University, teaching undergraduate courses in global politics and human rights. And another little piece of information I think is interesting is that her organization is really paying very, very careful attention to the new alliances around food security and how they are capturing resources that many of us feel should be really going to the farmers producing the food and the organizations supporting them. And of course, the European Parliament has had some misgivings and deliberated on the issue of the way that the whole build-up of these alliances is really capturing a lot of the attention and the resources. And the second speaker, many of you may know, I certainly know rather well. His name is Patrick Walsh. Mr. Walsh, we call him sometimes. He's also my partner. And he's got, as it is written here, over 4 decades of experience working in international civil society issues, first addressing aid and development issues around seeds, food, and agriculture, and trade, and more recently, his organization and he and his colleagues from the Accentuent group have focused on subjects like geoengineering, nanotechnology, synthetic biology, and the global governance of these technologies. He's also the co-founder and executive director, as you know, of the Accentuent group, formerly known as RAFI, and has several awards to his name, and is a member of a new panel looking at food security called the Food panel. And so he can tell you maybe a bit more about that, but of course we'll be focusing mostly on the corporate concentration side of things today. So with no further ado, if Aisha could come up. Please forgive the noise that's going to happen for a couple of minutes while we switch this. There appears to be no other option but to have that happen.
Sorry for the noise. Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. So yeah, I was just asked to come and talk for just kind of 12 to 15 minutes about one of the campaigns that the organisation I work for is working on. And that campaign is...
No, ahora se necesita traducción en español. ¿Sí? Oh. So, ¿está bien? Is it good? Is it fine, the translation?
Yes.
French is channel 2 and English is channel 1. Français, c'est canal 2. Ça va? On est bien? Okay, puis on n'a pas... Oh, yeah, okay, I'm going to ask that in French. Okay, go. Over to you again.
Okay, so yeah, I've just come to introduce you to a campaign that I'm working on around, broadly speaking, it's around the struggle for the food system, and it's about resisting corporate control, or the increasing control that corporations are taking of our food system. And specifically, what Global Justice Now is working on is resisting one particular example of this, which is an aid scheme called the New Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition. Before I jump straight into talk about an obscure aid project, I will just spend a few minutes just describing the context which has allowed these kind of aid schemes to exist. And I'm sure lots of you here already know this, but I think it's useful to go through to understand the context that we're currently working in. And so it's interesting to start off by talking about what is the current discourse around global food policy. So what we are currently told in all kind of authoritative circles around food policy is that we really need to produce more food, that there's a real imminent problem of a growing global population, and we really need to produce more food, and the people who are going to do this are the corporations. And this picture is just a screenshot from one of Monsanto's home pages. And what I think this picture really captures is what we're up against, is that corporations like Monsanto aren't just considered, part of a bigger system, part of a bigger picture of food and agriculture, but they are really looked to as the experts, as the future for our food. And I think that this is something that's it's very powerful because it's a very subtle and it's a very subtle narrative to understand that when we try to look at how we're going to produce food, who's going to produce it, that these are the people who are being looked to advise the governments, to take public money, and we're really kind of giving these corporations more and more power to decide on the future of all of our food. And this is, this is extremely problematic, not least because the discourse upon which we are looking at these corporations is, I think for many of us, is pretty flawed. The argument that we need to produce more food in itself is pretty widely contested. Figures are that we currently produce enough food to feed between 10 and 12 billion people. The world's population is currently 7, projected to rise to somewhere between 9 and 10 by 2050. So you don't need to be a mathematician to realise that we're kind of being fooled by this kind of argument that we need to produce more and more food. Moreover, it's kind of a bit of a dishonest argument because, as many of you probably know, the statistic that roughly 70% of the world's food is still produced by small-scale farmers. It's not produced by corporations. Yet, most kind of common knowledge is that, if we want to produce more food, we're going to rely on the private sector and big corporations. So this is the context in which we're seeing more and more government support going towards these corporations. And something that Pat will talk about, I've actually finished this slide from his that I use in my talks. Which, another part of this picture is obviously the increasing concentration of those corporations. So we're just seeing a situation where fewer and fewer hands own more and more of our global food system. And I'll let Pat talk through kind of why that's problematic in his talk. But in terms of kind of pulling together the picture of where we're currently at in global policy, I'm based in the UK, I work for a UK campaign organisation, and this chart, I'll just spend a minute talking through, because this is what we're up against when we're talking about kind of, the UK is a massive donor, it's got a legal commitment to spend 0.7% of GDP on overseas aid. It's fairly influential in policy spaces, it's in the G7. So what we're up against in terms of resisting this corporate control of our food system is government policy that looks something like this. And the UK government, at the end of last year, brought out its new strategy for global agriculture, and they coined their step up, step out, or hang in strategy, which is essentially their strategy to end small-scale farming. So according to DFID, and this is their agricultural expert team, they want to see a situation where small-scale farmers either step up, which means become large industrial farmers, or they step out. Well, that means stepping out of agriculture altogether, leaving the countryside. And when you read this report in detail, what it actually suggests is that the farmers move to the cities and join the manufacturing workforce, which, I'm sure many of you, that basically means go and work in sweatshops to produce consumer goods for the West. And the third option is just hang in, which is like, stay on as long as you can until, you do one of the other two. So this is kind of, this is UK, but it's not in isolation. This is the current thinking of kind of global powers, global governments. This is their future that they want to see for agriculture. So that's, that's the first part of what I want to say, is just kind of set the scene of, that's the background upon which things like the New Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition can happen. So what is the New Alliance? It's a multi-billion-pound aid scheme, essentially, that was launched in 2012 by the then G8. So it's it's a project with backing of powerful forces in the world. And it sounds really great because it's got nutrition, it's got food security in the title. Its objective is about bringing 50 million people out of poverty. There's nothing not to like. But what it really is about is bringing together partners from the private sector. This is just a handful that you can pick out, because there's 10 countries involved, each have their own country projects. And this is just a handful of the partners that are involved in the New Alliance. So really, what's the New Alliance about? Well, it's about bringing aid money, and huge amounts of aid money, billions of pounds of aid money, to these 10 African countries to partner with these multinational companies. And what do the African governments have to do in exchange? Well, of course, they have to see through a number of policy reforms. They have to, it includes things like liberalising their seed laws. They have to make investments. And I'm sure you're all familiar with that, what kind of things those mean, but they are essentially things that make labour cheap, conditions bad, and for agriculture basically means opening up and liberalising markets so that you can commercialise seeds, and that will obviously have implications for farmers who want to save and swap seeds, so much so that in some countries it's becoming illegal to practice that traditional way of saving and swapping seeds. And it also, by opening up the markets for these companies, also brings in more synthetic inputs, which then has implications for the farmers' costs. And so, essentially, in a nutshell, the people who really benefit from this aid scheme are these big corporations. And really, I mean, as far as anyone can tell, apart from the words used in the title, it's essentially a way of expanding the market for these big agribusiness and food companies. And this was, I apologize to anyone who's in the earlier session because I mentioned some of this already, but I didn't show this earlier, which is a really, I think it's just, because often when you talk about these things, it can seem really dry and boring, and I'm banging on about an obscure aid project, and not many people are interested in that. The latest annual review of the New Alliance, all of which, by the way, is really obscure. If you look at the New Alliance website, which don't forget it's billions of pounds of public money, there's not a single contact detail on there. It's get any information. They brought out the annual review they brought out was brought out 6 months late, and it wasn't even a proper review. But when they did finally bring the review out, it was really boring, and it just read like a financial review, like a financial report. It didn't really talk about anything. So what I did was just do a Control F and search for different word terms because I was so bored. And this was probably the most interesting finding from the report, which, if you want to understand what this aid project is, this kind of tells you. So if you look at how many times companies are mentioned, which is 113, versus how many times people are mentioned, or investment versus hunger, which is 101 versus 5. So the whole title of the project is a complete scam. It's not really about hunger and nutrition. It's about companies, investment. It's about the private sector expanding its market. And I'm talking about this aid scheme that some of you might have never heard of, and it might disappear one day, but really that's kind of besides the point, because the New Alliance represents the big family. The New Alliance represents the kind of vested interests of governments and multinationals, and what they're really doing is through their agricultural policies. So I mean that in a nutshell is the New Alliance. So yeah, my Global Justice Now, who I work for, and a number of different civil society groups and farmers organisations around the world have been campaigning against this. But like I say, just really is part of a bigger fight and struggle against this kind of corporate takeover of our food system. So I was just going to talk to you a little bit about part of the campaign. I went last year to some different farmers groups in Tanzania. And I mean, these are some of the groups. So it's African Centre for Biodiversity, TOAM, which is the Tanzania Organic Agriculture Movement, and this organisation called Sustainable Agriculture Tanzania. And the really interesting thing is that these were all these different farmer groups that was the New Alliance, which for the UK government, Tanzania is a big source of focus. It's a big investment opportunity. There's a huge agricultural project opening up there, which is giving way to huge amounts of the country's fertile lands over to these big projects. So it's a big. There's a lot of money going into that country at the moment in the name of this kind of big industrial green revolution type of investment in agriculture. And there's these different farmers groups across the country who are resisting it. And some of them are resisting it from kind of political place, and other farmers are just resisting it because it just doesn't work for them. And something I mentioned earlier, we talked about in the earlier session, was about, for a lot of these farmers, it's not about resisting it because they don't like corporations. It's about resisting a system of farming that doesn't actually work for them. That the results when they switch to these kind of agroecological practices, the results are so much better for their crops. And even though that's kind of small scale and it's going to evidence, it really backs up what some of what other bigger studies and academic papers show, which is that this small scale of farming is actually a lot more effective for yields. And this woman, Janet Marrow, some of you might have heard of, she set up this huge, she started off small and it's become quite a big regional training centre in agroecological practices. And farmers are now coming from neighbouring countries, and they're all coming because they've heard other farmers tell them about it, and there's no other, they're coming because word has spread about how effective it is. And you know, for me, as someone, I'm not a farmer, I'm a campaigner, and I'm a campaigner for an organisation that's campaigns against, you know, different symptoms of kind of broken capitalist systems. So, you know, I guess what I'm saying is, I have ideological reasons, I guess, to kind of not like Monsanto. Whereas for a lot of the farmers I met, their resistance was, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't really about that. It didn't work. And it was really, yeah, it was kind of outrageous that the UK government would think to kind of keep pushing and dispossessing these farmers from their land and from the methods of farming that work best for them. And then just in the last 5 minutes, I guess, I'm leaving a slightly more positive note, because in the European Union, which the UK now is leaving, but there was some positive things happening recently in the European Union. So Olivier de Schuster last year, some of you know, he's the former special rapporteur to the UN on food security, so a global authority on this issue, did a report on this aid scheme specifically, and basically showed that it was really, really terrible. So it was really amazing tool for campaigners because, you know, of course, you know, an NGO who campaigns against neoliberalism isn't going to like this project. But you know, this is the kind of global expert, someone in the establishment also saying the same thing. And here I've just highlighted some of the key things that came out of this report, which is just, you know, kind of pulling out its deficiencies, saying, you know, the kind of land reforms were really dangerous because they were going to push people off their lands. The voluntary guidelines weren't really being taken seriously in a meaningful way. But I think that the last one is kind of really quite shocking, because it's the strongest one, which is about the needs of women and women's rights. And the report showed that not, you know, that actually what was being implemented through this aid scheme, and to emphasise this is supposed to be an aid scheme, was that it's going to negatively affect women's rights. And that's just a kind of disgusting use of aid money to kind of turn the situation back for women. But anyway, I mean, the report came out, which was really slaving the New Alliance, and that triggered a process in the European Parliament whereby essentially in June a report was put to the Parliament that was very much picked up on these themes, but it was a European Parliament report, so there was another one that also put forward very, very critical position on this aid scheme. And the European Parliament, amazingly, with a big majority, approved this report. So there is now, you know, democratically elected parliaments representing, you know, 24 countries in Europe that has now, you know, put on paper formally the recognition that this aid project isn't going to work. So now, you know, there's a real, the onus is now back on us as campaigners to make sure that the donor, because the EU, sorry, is the donor to the aid scheme. So now to really push the donors to kind of ask them not only what are you doing supporting this aid scheme, but what are you doing supporting this model of agriculture. I think I've run out of time, so maybe I should just leave it there, that there is kind of, you know, some glimmer of hope, where there is some recognition that, you know, that this model that's been pushed for quite a few years isn't really working. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have some time for some clarification questions, etc., right after Pat speaks as well on this first part one, and then, eventually a longer dialogue at the end. So Pat, while he's walking over here, I don't know about you, but that's stepping up, stepping out, or leaning in. I turned to my neighbor and I said, that makes me so fucking angry.
And I'll trust that you'll keep me on time, as you always do. Aisha and Goldness now have already made the connection between what the corporations are saying and doing and what the governments are saying and doing, in the industrialized world at least. And that's very clear. I'm going to focus on more what the corporations are saying and doing to the governments, recognizing, as we have, the distinction between what the UK government or the Americans or the Canadians or the Australians or New Zealanders say. What they say as governments is what the corporations say. It's very hard to find a distinction when we come to looking at international food policies. But as you're aware from the media, there's a lot going on in terms of corporate concentration in the food system. And it's throughout the food system. I want to focus more on what's happening in agricultural inputs, but please believe me, it's not going to end there. It's happening at both ends of the food chain. And in many ways, the food chain is actually coming together into one sort of system of rigor mortis along the chain, I think we call it. And I want you to go back to what we were being told in the 1970s and the 1980s when seed companies and pesticide companies were merging. At that point, everybody said, hey, that doesn't make any sense. Why would a company dominated by pesticides choose to develop seed varieties that are resistant to disease? Why would they? They make more money on pesticides. So it destroyed the incentive of the industry to even think about developing more resilient plant varieties. But we allowed that to happen. And the corporations, as we complained about the sort of concentration in the system, and especially complained about the risk of greater monoculture in our food system, the corporations came back and said to us, the new technologies permit us to have diversity through time. Which means that, yes, we're going to destroy the diversity in the field, but don't worry, we have diversity in the lab coming along. And we have all kinds of wonderful things back there, and we'll churn them out rapidly. So even though you may have a monoculture of maize or wheat or rice or something, or cows and chickens and pigs for that matter, out there, we'll solve that problem because we've got this huge long funnel of good stuff coming from our new technologies, biotechnology chief among them. And so government let that happen. We went from 7,000 different seed companies in the 1960s down to really now where we have charitably 6 that dominate the global commercial seed market. We went from having 65 different major pesticide companies in the world down to where we have, optimistically, really 9 that count for anything. And we have, in fact, since the 1960s, going back to the beginning of the patenting around plant varieties, what we've actually seen is a 75% decline in the genetic diversity of the foods we eat. That doesn't mean it's lost to the farmers entirely, but it's being lost to Western science. They can't find the damn stuff anymore. Farmers have got it, many places, but science doesn't have it anymore. We lost up to 75% of genetic diversity. We lost 36% of the species diversity of what we eat in industrialized countries. There's been an implosion of the actual stuff that we put on our table. We think it's otherwise. We think we've got lots of pomegranate and kiwi and stuff like that, and quinoa is growing for us these days, kale, we all talk about. The reality is most of us eat fewer species now than we used to. And during that same time, in the 1960s, what we've also seen is a significant decline in the nutritional value of our food system, ranging from a low of 5% loss to nutrition since the 60s to a 40% loss to nutrition in some other species. So that idea of, don't worry, our technologies are going to give us diversity through time, hasn't worked. Today what we're getting is something else. They're now telling us, and this is almost impossible to believe, but it is true. They're saying that we're going to merge because the technologies we have to deal with are expensive and they have to be at such a massive scale. They only really work at a global system-wide scale. Monopoly is unavoidable, but don't worry. We're going to give you competition through time. We'll be monopoly now, but over time you're going to see that the leaders in the monopoly are going to keep on changing as the technologies and the so-called platform technologies that are being developed will keep on changing. There'll be new leaders all the time. So don't worry, be happy. But it is what they're finally saying to argue for the mega mergers of today is that there really are only two technologies that are important. And in some ways you can describe them as one technology. It's big data, the capacity to manage everything that the consumer buys in the food stores, with the knowledge of the big data that tells us what the soil conditions are like, what the weather conditions are like, what the crop insurance is telling us, what the seeds are like, and everything else. The data manages that. It's all ones and zeros, basically. And it's the capacity of the corporations through history to be able to have that knowledge really in 10 meter squares around the world as to what the soil conditions are like, what the yields have been in the past, and what the weather conditions are likely to be in the future, what the crop insurance will involve, what the market's going to involve, what you're going to finally buy at the end of the day. That data crunching, that capacity to manage, is overwhelmingly important throughout the food chain. And it's causing emergence because it requires a scale and benefits from the scale that we haven't seen in the past. But when we're talking about that kind of data management, there's also the other technology, which is not data, but it is DNA. We can now manage the genome, genetics, in a way that they say, it's not true, but that we've never been able to do in the past. So the new technology, the need for, again, massive scale and monopoly, is because now it's no longer just GMOs, it's no longer just synthetic biology, it's no longer just gene drives. All the new technologies and techniques which are coming out there, there's one a day almost, it feels like. It really is our ability now in science to say, to get in there and adjust the A, C, Gs, and Ts of DNA, to change the chromosome endings, to make them longer and shorter, create a sterility factor, make all of the next species, the next generation, male or female or whatever you want to do, all that can be done without moving genes from one species to another. And the ability to manipulate DNA that way for livestock and for crops is so powerful. And by the way, it's happened literally in less than the last 2 years. It's so recent that, again, they must operate at a scale which requires monopoly. And in the basis of that assumption, they're saying to what we couldn't imagine otherwise, to the governments that Aisha talks about, what they're saying to governments is, therefore, you have to allow Monsanto to merge with Bayer, but maybe BASF at the end of the day, we're not quite sure. You must allow Syngenta to merge with ChemChina. You must allow Dow to merge with DuPont. And so we're going to move from a world in which, for the last decade almost, we've had 6 companies only on this planet that control 75% of all agricultural research. We're going to move from 6 to 3 or 4, depending on how it all shakes out. And that's in seeds and pesticides, by the way. These companies control already about more than 50% of the world's seeds and more than 60% of the world's pesticides. When it's over, that'll be down in the hands of those 3 companies. Now that's bad enough, but it's actually worse than that. Because if they are allowed to get away with this idea of competition through time, as in with diversity through time, with the new technologies, then what they're going to be able to do is say, well, we must extend that along the food chain. Because the scale really demands a much greater control. The fear of climate change, which is quite legitimate, of course, the fear of climate change, the concerns about the quality of our food, food safety, and so on, the concerns that Aisha mentions about will there be 9 or 10 billion people in 2050, all that becomes the argument that they can use to say that we actually have to go further than just seeds and pesticides together, And within 5 years, if these mergers are allowed to go through now, you will see farm machinery companies buying seed and pesticide mergers because they're massively bigger. We tend to think of Monsanto as the big demon in the food system. It's pretty small. The combined power of the entire seed industry globally, the combined sales of the entire global seed industry don't, or just barely equal the sales of John Deere, one farm machinery company. It's huge. The 3 top farm machinery companies control more than half of global farm machinery trade. They're much, much bigger than seed companies and pesticide companies. And they have the box in the field or in the garden that everyone else puts their products into. They win at the end of the day because that's where the seed goes, that's where the pesticides go, that's where the fertilizer goes. They've got the satellite communications, they've got the robotics already in place, they've got the big data management to overwhelm the genomics management of the companies in the input side to take control of this. They're bigger, they've got more money, and they control the field at the end of the day. Whereas Monsanto works in 10-meter squares in industrialized countries to understand what can grow on, John Deere can bring it down to a few centimeters. They've been in the business for a long time managing the data. So we'll move to that control. Within 5 or 6 years, if the first merger is allowed to go through, this theory of crisis, the pressure of that, the shock doctrine of a crisis in food, will lead them to say, okay, merge those, all that, all the inputs together. And I haven't mentioned livestock, which is actually something scary, frankly. And then you go from there to say, okay, what's happening in the rest of the food chain? No, I just about out of time. Okay. I was a subtle lady asking you how much time do I have left.
The same amount of time.
Okay. And the other end of the food chain, you've got companies like Amazon saying they're going to become the biggest food retailer within 10 years on the planet. Because the same big data management, the need to understand what consumers will buy and where and how and what conditions and so on, rests with companies like Amazon, who know that they can either use Uber or drones or somebody to deliver the food to your door. Of course, we're only talking here about metropolitan powers and industrial, the big cities around the world. But that's what they want to serve. They don't care about anybody else. They're saying that they can manage that data and they need to. And already you've got companies like the Loblaws of the world being much more alarmed now about where they're going to fit in the future because they're not required. Because all you need is a hub in each city to warehouse the food and then it's distributed to your door. That's already occupies about 1/3 of the market in Korea. In terms of food being delivered, it's a huge part of the food system. Rapidly increasing, not improving, in the United Kingdom, and increasingly now around the world, especially this summer with the announcements from Amazon, they're going to move in big into the system. So there's a concentration using the same technologies. And at the same time, Nestle's and Unilever and the other major companies that are on the processing end of the system are panicked by the squeeze coming from both sides. They're saying they've got to get into this as well. So now Nestle's has more agronomists working for it than the consultative group on international agricultural research, the largest public sector, so-called, food research system on the planet. They're bigger. So they're competing for this as well. So we're going to be seeing an increased amount of mergers across the system. What will we end up with then? We talk about the world of 2050 and feeding ourselves with climate change and so on. Well, we end up with, if they have their way, which they will not, we end up with a world in which already about almost 40% of all agricultural research in the private sector is on one crop. Maize, corn, one single crop. How are they going to get us through climate change working on one crop? Diversity through time, go to hell. It ain't gonna happen. So we have now a battle. On one side we have food sovereignty, the Via Campesina, peasant movements, and those of us that care about food, fighting for a better system, and getting there in many exciting ways that we'll be hearing about today. And on the other side, we've got this industrial food chain. The food chain, since the 1960s, has given us 103,000 plant varieties that they've patented. 103,000. They're proud of that. That sounds good. Farmers, peasant agriculture has given us and donated, not patented, 2.1 million plant varieties that they bred. 100,000 compared to 2.1 million. Who are you going to trust against climate change? The companies, these are all here. The companies have given us research on really about 12 crops. Again, with more than 40% or almost 40% of the research on one crop. Just 12 crops, including roses and chrysanthemums. Methylene chrysanthemums. On the other side, farmers have given us research and varieties in 7,000 crops. Food crops, not roses and chrysanthemums. So who's going to get us through that? If you look at livestock, the companies are working on 5 species of livestock only. And they're working with less than 100 breeds of livestock. And in almost each of the 5 species, there are normally only 2 companies doing the research to breed for the future. 2 companies. Also in terms of fish, by the way. On the other side, peasant agriculture is working with 40 species, not 5, and with almost 8,000 unique livestock breeds that can't be found anywhere else. You can respond to all the new conditions of climate change. So the solution then is, in my mind, is quite clear. We've got to stop the mergers, don't let them get bigger, don't let them claim something called competition through time. The monopoly is okay, and argue for the real diversity that food sovereignty gives us and agroecology gives us, and promote that diversity through that system of farms for climate change. And we can do it. The mergers that are being talked about can be stopped, and I'll end with this, but I'm sure I'm getting close to the end. The argument I make is that we could have these mergers accepted by the very docile governments of the European Union, the European Commission, even though the Parliament is much better than the Commission is. And Ashley's quite right about that, and we'll just now should congratulate for his work on that. At the same time, the reality is that those docile governments could easily, in Brussels and in Washington, agree to the mergers. It doesn't change anything. The market for the seed and pesticide companies is not in the north. The market is in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The emerging market really is in 4 countries. Argentina, Brazil, India, and China, who collectively together make up 28% of the global pesticide market, and that's the growing part, the rest is stagnant. If they say no, the shareholders will say no, because there's no money to be made. If they don't allow the merger to take place in their country, to their farmers, there's no money. And the same is true of Kenya or South Africa and others, but not as big in terms of the market. If they get together and say, we will not allow these mergers, they won't happen. So we in civil society, those of us who work like US and Canada does, and Brain and so on, work together, what we can do, well, just as now, what we can do is stop these mergers, warn them about the danger of them, break up the stupid original mergers of the seeds and pesticide companies back in the 1970s, say that does not make any ecological sense at all, break it up, and we can prevent mergers down the road and the other levels of the food chain and the processors and retailers. By pointing to them now, this is that moment in history, in the course of the next year or so, where if you block those mergers and get the global attention of our governments and society to recognize this has gone too far, and there is a better way, I honestly believe we can win. I've been fighting these issues for half a century, and I've never felt more optimistic about the good news we have, what's really happening, and is really important, and is really making an impact on a large scale. 70% of the food we eat comes from peasants. That's the reality. We can make that work for the rest of the world. And we can stop this kind of merger taking place now because they are so overexposed, they are so vulnerable as they try to make these mergers, we will win. Thank you very much.
charters from both Pat and Aisha, but it's your chance to ask for some clarification or make some comments. We have a few minutes, and then we'll move into our second part that really will look at many more of the positive stories about how we are taking control. So, the question, yes. Well, the first time I saw was there.
I was just saying hello.
Oh, okay. Comments, questions?
I guess I'm just wondering in the question of how do we actually act against the mergers? Is it support of legitimate organizations? Like what the actual tangible concrete things that we do to help break apart these mergers to inform on a day-to-day basis?
So the question is, what are the tangible steps that can be taken to try to stop these mergers? Sort of very practical actions that the everyday person can do, or our groups or movements. Pat, do you want to comment?
You want one at a time, or do you want to make a few questions?
Okay, that's one question then. Keep track of that. Number two, another question or comment? Maybe we'll just take 3 for now. Yeah?
One of the things, speaking about Africa, since it was mentioned as one of the places where these massive agro-businesses are looking to go and grab land, is the fact that the peasants that we're speaking about are always not very powerful, and they're always terrorized by their governments, and corporations are able to come in by working with political and business elites. So one of the things to think about is how do we empower everyday people, the farmers, the peasants, to be able to speak for themselves and resist without fear of being persecuted, and in some cases even being killed by government forces.
Yeah, so I'm repeating, by the way, just for translation purposes, because it needs to be into the mic. So the question there is, in many African countries, a lot of peasant farmers are basically oppressed by their governments and are afraid to speak up. And so how can we help them become more informed about these issues and be able to, challenge their governments to act in ways that support what they do? So that's the second. One more? Yes?
Expliquer le lien entre le libre-échange et the consolidation de compagnie.
So is there a link between fair trade, free trade and the corporate concentration that's happening today? Okay, I think we should maybe want to come up here and Aisha, do you want to come up too, please? We'll just pass this around rather than putting it on your head. I think it works better if it serves more. So, do you want to answer the first question? Okay, Pat, do you want to answer the first question?
The immediate steps. Any noise we can make in Canada or any of our countries, industrialized or anywhere else in the world, about the mergers, to question politicians and say, why don't you allow these mergers in your country? Let's stop it in this country, is important. Because even though the Canadian government may capitulate to the merger to say, no, we can't go against what the United States is doing, the media coverage of that will get the attention of other parts of the world. So any resistance anywhere will get awareness everywhere how important this issue is. So there's no place that's not worth fighting it. And there'll be surprising places where we'll win. Argentina, for example, the right-wing government, right now, a very tough right-wing government, is fighting tooth and nail with Monsanto. The Supreme Court has come out against Monsanto's patents on maize. The farmers are against the prices they're paying for Monsanto's soybeans. There's a resistance to these big companies taking over the market for all the reasons I don't particularly care for, frankly. But they're on our side of this issue. So in fact, we will get surprising governments backing us to oppose the mergers around the world. Secondly, we need to be then saying to our governments, when you go to the Committee on World Food Security in Rome in October, put this issue on the table because it is the most important issue. We're talking about food security right now. That's the issue. I don't care what else is on the table. If they allow these mergers to go through, there is no food security. So our governments have to know that, they've got to be talked to now, when they go there, they've got to agree to make this an emergency topic and have a UN agreement to stop the purchase. So those things have a right to your member of parliament, right to the committees in parliament, to the Minister of Agriculture, and to the Minister of Competition Policy and say, these mergers have to be stopped in every country. If you go to our website, this is the ETC group, sorry for the ad, ETC group, all one word, .org. We have there information about the mergers in detail. We also have a list of all of the countries in the world where they have competition offices. So you can write to that competition office and challenge the merger directly through that. And the data, what to argue, the facts you're talking are there at that place as well.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the second question, I mean, of course, I mean, the standing up to power, standing up to governments is, you know, of course, you're going to be, of course, the government's going to respond to that. And I mean, sadly, you know, all political change, all movements, all social movements throughout history have had to, you know, have faced opposition from the government, and then you don't. That is the nature of the way any social movement works, you know. And so, how can we support farmers' movements? Well, you know, there's no kind of there's no secret key. It's, you know, of course we need to work in solidarity. We need to work in coalitions. We need to listen to those farmers and support them. I don't think there's no way around, because what we're up against is huge, and the battle is so vast. And yeah, I mean, it's true what you say, that I know obviously face victimization from government. I mean, I come from an organisation that's all about working in solidarity with those groups, and that's the model that I think for those of us in kind of, you know, in the global north, that's just, it has to be integral in our campaigns that they're in, you know, that we're constantly in solidarity with global movements. I think, do you want to add to?
And the third question is related to free trade agreements and the role of the corporations with governments. And I think you can guess the answer. Corporate concentration. I mean, the free trade agreements that we're dealing with these days, and the ones we've been dealing with now for a couple of decades, are really corporate accommodation treaties. They really do follow the guidance and rules of the corporations, to the point where in the negotiations, whereas members of parliament and members of congresses and so on are not allowed to have access to the negotiating texts, corporations are, and are actually sitting at the table in those negotiations. They're getting exactly what they want from these deals. So there's a very close link, and the corporations are getting the freedom of movement, the freedom of operation they want to conduct the kinds of mergers that they want to have. It's that clear. I really hate to sound a bit like Donald Trump on that. So, on the record, I'm not speaking. This is not an endorsement of that atheism.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to add and say, like the aid scheme that I talked about, and many other aid schemes, trade deals that are, you know, currently being negotiated, CETA, you know, at the essence, you know, you don't need to be a genius, you don't need to kind of go deep, you just scratch the surface, and we know whose interests they serve. So, of course, they're going to serve the interests of the corporate masters. I don't, yeah, I mean, that's a no-brainer.
So I think we're going to move on to part two, but you can see why perhaps there's a tendency to swear. And just to add to the question around, you know, the risks that those farmers take, we can, you know, sit on our high horses and challenge, but we're pretty comfortable and we're not taking the same level of risks. And thank you for that reminder that it is for some farmers a life and death experience, and I think we all know and feel very saddened. And I have a colleague of mine from Honduras who was a friend of Beatriz, my last name. Yes. Who lost her life in these kinds of campaigns. So thank you so much for that thoughtful reminder. Okay, so part 2 is actually going to move to the more positive look at these issues. And we're really pleased to have with us a really important global leader when it comes to resistance and challenging the system and being incredibly effective. And that's Mamadou Goïta, who I have to say is also a member of our board of directors. A socioeconomist and specialist actually in education and training systems, but really a very important activist who, with his Institute for Research and Promotion of Alternatives and Development, IRPAD, in Mali, has really played a very important role in West Africa and globally around stopping those forces that seem inevitable and overwhelming, and through very focused and strategic action has been able to, and you'll hear some really good stories about some very important work in stopping governments in their adoption of policies, like, for example, in Mali, the introduction of GMO cotton. So if you can come and share with us. I'm also going to introduce now the 3 other speakers. So we have Stephen Bartlett as well from the World Coalition. He's based in Louisville, Kentucky. And also representing Media Campesina. And he is a farmer. He's also done a lot of thoughtful work in urban agriculture. He's a linguist and a seed saver. Coral Sproul from fairly close to Ottawa, from Perth, is the woman's president of the National Farmers Union. She runs Green Heat Farm, it's a CSA vegetable farm here, and has a growing interest in growing heirloom vegetables, supposed to devote more and more time towards seed saving, is a farmer leader in the resistance to GMOs and that movement in Canada. And finally, Lucy Sharrett, who is the coordinator of the Canadian Biotechnology Action Network, or CBAN, that, as many of you know, brings together 17 organizations ranging from farmers associations and unions, environmental groups, international development organizations, activists generally who are very concerned about genetic engineering. And she has a background as a campaigner researcher with the Sierra Club of Canada and the Polaris Institute, and helped to coordinate a very successful international ban terminator campaign. So first,
Thanks to Susie for this introduction, and I really hope that we'll be sharing our hopes here and the perspectives in terms of resistance against the system. Partner Aisha has been describing the state of the issue that we have, and specifically how things have been moving slowly to this situation that we are facing today. And I will share with you some of the action that we took in Africa particularly, but also at a global level, and for sure that our colleagues who will be speaking after me will be more prolific in some of the contributions concerning other continents. Just to talk about resistance on the food system mainly, we need to be able to recall some of the steps, the key steps, and the key event that happened, and that has been not the starting point, but where we are trying to develop the strategies for this resistance today. I will be recalling the 96 World Food Day in Hall, when this concept of food sovereignty came out from Media Campesina. It's a very important step that has given space to social movements to build on something that is not only political, but also very concrete things that help us to frame our way of looking at things. 96, many companies, corporations that have been described came in a conclusion after studying saying that the world food system should go back in the hands of corporations. Why? Because people are too slow to produce enough for the world. Secondly, there are so unused lands because of lack of investment capacities, lack of political will, and so on and so forth, that there was a need to give space, political space, to corporations so that they can just work and feed the world. Not only producing, but also organizing the market system. Because sometimes we are disconnecting the debate between production systems and the access to market systems. So upstream and downstream issues shouldn't be separate in the fight that we are having today. You cannot, this is why this question about the EPAs, economic partnership agreements, and the concentration of seeds or lands in the hands of some company cannot be separated. It cannot be, because these are two sides of the coin that we need to put in our circle. So 1996, when they came with this conclusion that corporations are the key players who should feed the world, that Jack Campesina said that in this case, food security means eat and share. You eat, you don't care about where your food is coming from, who is producing it, in which condition it's produced. Whatever you have it, because it's cheap, because they say that there are so enough nutrients to make you keep safe in your life and then walk. And it's not physically, you can find it coming from whatever it is. So this means that you are food secure. And the first resistance in that sense is to say we cannot eat and close our mouths without saying what this food is coming from. Then the concept of food sovereignty is to say that politically, in addition to the fact that we want food, we want it in a sustainable way, we want to develop our own food system and have this linkage between producers and consumers, and to territorialize the fight, because food is also culture. We cannot separate. Some people will eat white beans and others won't eat it because the culture doesn't allow them to eat it. So it cannot come from somewhere where you say that we have enough resources to invest. But if you look at the models that are developed, the Green Revolution model, the public-private partnership model that is in the access to market issue, you look at the new alliance that has been described by Aisha, you look at the Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA model, you look at the AGRA model, you look at the GROW model, because all these are initiatives that are now coming out, they are all converging in one point, just giving power to corporations. Private sector, on land, on sea, on water, and so on and so forth, and to allow that. So one of the key resistance model is to work on food sovereignty and the 6 key principles that are related to it. Because it gives power back to those who are producing. It gives power back to consumers who are concerned about what they are eating daily. It gives power to these territorial markets that are localized for local, national, and cross-border exchanges between communities, creating wealth, as they are saying, but also creating jobs and conditions for people to reproduce this system that we are used to. So for that, there are global movements that are being organized around that. And these global movements have been acting not only to defend positions on what people are doing, what I call to fight for something, but at the same time to see how we can stop this offensive way of corporations coming in our homes, because our farms is the key spaces where this production system is built on in our countries and our villages and our continents. So this global resistance within the end of farmers organizations, NGOs, but other companies have been organizing a key event in Mali that we call the Yearly event. 2007, because corporations took over this concept of food sovereignty and were bringing them in regional perspectives for themselves, accessing to, again, the land market that they want to create, the seed market that they want to create, and all this introduction of biotechnology in our agricultural systems. So just realizing that the concept was hijacked by the same companies, social movement decided to have this conference in mind. And where working on the principles that are related to food sovereignty came out in this 2007 with the Japan and other social movements in my country, in Mali. Just building resistance on key targets and also organizing it continentally, but also at each national level and regional level. And we have some movement that we created in West Africa, but also Africa-wide. The first one that we have now, that is new, 2009, is ASA, the Alliance of Food Sovereignty in Africa. It's one of the processes that came out of this social movement that we have around food sovereignty, saying that our continent is one of the most concerned about, because of our states are very fragile in the sense of the governance issues and discussion between government and the social movement, that we need to inform people and to show that Africa is resisting against this aggression coming outside but also inside, because the system is introduced by our own governments. And then we need to resist against policies, we need to resist against the instruments that are supporting these policies. And if you look at the framing of even the global programs like GAFS, for instance, Global Agricultural and Food Security Program, we look at and we see that the big part of the resources that are mobilized by the G8 countries is going to the private sector window, because we have two windows, public sector window and private sector window. For instance, if you look at the budget that the money that Canada is putting in the GAFS program, the biggest part of it, the biggest share is going to the private sector window to support with public resources, private companies, to do business in the agricultural sector. So there is resistance against that. AFSA is working to look at the way that these corporations are taking power in our continent, that to resist against it, and then put on table alternatives like the one that we have been contributing to in the regional ecological forum organized in Dakar last year. We have been organizing also a caravan. A caravan with the support of most of the organizations in the continent, to say that there is now a convergence of the fights. We cannot just fight against on the seed issue separately, another group fighting on water issue, the other end, and there is another group fighting on land issue or what access to water and so on and so forth. Let's bring these fights together. And this is why the convergence of the fights came out during the World Social Forum in Dakar in 2011, saying that there is a need to bring all this together. The same way people are grabbing seeds, they are grabbing lands, they are grabbing also water, because we have problems accessing to, for small-scale fishing, for accessing to the area for production. In the cities, they are grabbing water also, preventing small-scale fishing folks even access to the coast and turning to sell the oil product because of the hotels, all these kind of things. It didn't propose just to prevent these small-scale producers to access to that. So we have been organizing a caravan, even though in terms of communication, how the outcome of this movement has gone, but we are sure that these are the kind of initiatives that will allow the biggest majority of the communities to know what's going on in this continent. We have been organizing caravans specifically on seed issues. I've been talking about Burkina case, and talking about what we did in the case of Mali to prevent Monsanto to start working on BT cotton in my country because of the resistance of the social movement that they stopped doing it. They started in Burkina Faso. We have been challenging them in organizing caravans, but also giving a lot of information to communities, informing people, just going in the parliaments and talking to people. In many cases, possible, but other cases has been very, very difficult because some of the countries won't allow to have such movement. But this is also one of the key that we are trying to work on. And in West Africa, because I've been talking on Pan-African level with AFSA, we have a movement that is called Copagem, that has been since 2004 in 9 countries in West Africa, fighting to inform people, to challenge some of the government policies. And in the case of countries like Mali, on the land issue, finally they decided to have a land policy in my country, and I was in charge of coordinating a team that included all our concern on preventing land grabbing and all these kind of things in the country. So now we are working on a land policy, agricultural land policy, that will prevent people just to give this land to foreign companies and then allowing small-scale producers and family farms in priority access to this land in certain conditions and the principles that need to be supported. So we are working also to see how in each country level, this kind of concept can be operationalized and then we're taking actions. In the case of Mali, in our agricultural policy, it's clear that food sovereignty is the guideline. And in West Africa, we succeeded also at ECOWAS level. This is why the Millennium Forum took place in my country, just to put food sovereignty as the key guidelines of the policy that we are being implemented in the continent. But this is not preventing our continent to face all these big challenges, because Monsanto, for instance, in the case of Burkina Faso, was paying more than 85% of the salaries of researchers in this country. This means that our research system, in that case, belongs to them. And how to take it back? We organize a people jury on scientific research in Mali, but also have been bringing the result of this challenging the agri in Accra, just to show that we want our government to invest in our research. This is the sovereignty domain. It's like this security of the country. You cannot give it to someone else. You have to put your resources on it and then see it. So part of its resistance is also creating conditions, political conditions in our country, so that we can have this kind of investment that is really relevant to have our own sovereignty on research. Because you cannot talk about food sovereignty if you don't have city sovereignty, you don't have land sovereignty, and you don't have this kind of control on the resources that people are doing. So the key principle, the first one on food sovereignty, is the control of the resources is in the end of producers and consumers themselves. So these are some of the key things that we are doing in the continent, and trying to not only stop this offensive way of cooperation, but at the same time putting on scale what we can do and what we have to do. This is our ecological perspective in our continent. So I hope that the questions and answers will come up from so many people. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great, and we will have an opportunity for some questions, etc. Just a quick comment on the mention that Monsanto was paying 85% of salaries of researchers in Burkina Faso. The Western Canadian headquarters of Monsanto, guess where that's based? University of Manitoba. Stephen, you'd like to come join us.
Bonjour, good morning. Who in the room does education? Teacher? Who in the room is a gardener, growing vegetables or fruits? Right. The reason I mention those two careers is that I think any one of those two careers can become a very important part of the food sovereignty movement. If you have children that you teach, there's so many opportunities to bring nature education to them, to have them plant things and learn about biology through actually experiencing directly growing food and observing nature. If you're a gardener, you can become a frontline person to save seeds find one or two crops that you want to save seeds from. I will pass this around. If someone would like more information after the talk, please give me your information. We'd love to have that. But also mention, who here is from Quebec? All right. So you all know the Union Paysan. We are very happy to be welcomed by them, our partner, the accomplishment members here in Quebec. And we are, their struggle is our struggle. So the biggest thing that Union Paysan is asking, right, is for democratization of their organization. So they don't have to be represented by a monopoly trade union that does not represent their interests, right? I mentioned that, and if you'd like more information, we can put you in contact with members of Union Paysan who are here with us today. My name again is Stephen Bartlett. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, and I'd like to first follow in the discussion about Nieleni. We have members of our movement in the United States who were inspired, who were there in Nieleni, and who then, in 2008, when there was a food price shock, 2008, the price of foods, basic grains went up 80%. There were hunger and food riots around the world. There was a group that formed in the United States called the Food Crisis Working Group, and we organized toward the U.S. Social Forum in Detroit. And at that time, we held a People's Movement Assembly, and we were able then, from that experience, to launch the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, which many members of Via Campesina are part of, but which also includes organizations in every part of the food system. People in food processing, people in restaurants, urban producers, farm workers in struggles for labor rights, groups that are trying to feed very unhealthy communities in the inner cities because they've lost access to fresh food and who are producing food in the urban environment. I would like to share on that note some experiences that we've had in terms of saving seeds and creating our own market relations in the cities, direct marketing, from a justice point of view. And first, on the seed issue, about 19 years ago, I was desperate to grow some food because I had to leave the farm that I learned my agriculture and come to the city. And luckily, I found a little piece of ground, a very small piece of ground, but I began finding other sources of land access. And I bought some seeds from a local seed company that, by the way, that seed company is no longer in existence. And many of those same seeds are now handled by a company that was bought by Monsanto. But no matter, because we have the seeds. We are the guardians of those seeds now. A white corn that we began planting, myself and a few friends. And we planted it in different locations where we could find a good plot of land. That was 19 years ago. 6 years ago, we began planting it more in a communal way, in a collective way. And we combined it with other heirloom corns. And our corn that we feed ourselves with, basically, is now multicolored, and we've given it our own name. It's very fun to save seeds. You're a guardian, you change the colors, you play with nature and the exchange of pollen. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. And you can do it in many crops, wherever you may live. This corn went through the drought of 2011. It went through the drought of 2012 and produced where no other corns produced. So far, we have had no GMO contamination because we've been planting it either in the city or on locations far from the neighboring corn fields, which, if you know the United States, you know that GMO corn dominates all corn crops across the United States, mostly Roundup ready corn. This year, we made an error of planting our corn on the edge of my friend's farm, and no one else was planting near that until 2 weeks after we planted our corn. The neighbor brought in his tractor 100 meters from our corn and planted a big crop. We thought, oh, hopefully they'll be planting soybeans, but it was not. It was corn. And just about a month ago, I was there with some local immigrant friends of mine. We were weeding our plot by hand because it's so wet. And a giant machine, dispenser of inputs, giant machine with wheels about 2 meters tall, appeared in our neighbor's field there and proceeded to spray glyphosate across the cornfield. And in about 3 minutes, they were finished and drove off. The machine must cost $500,000. And there we were pulling our grass out of our corn and beans and squash by hand. And it took us 7 hours, and we did only half the field. But that's what we're facing. Those are the two models of agriculture, right in contact. And for me, I became very angry at that moment, and it confirmed to me that we cannot have these two systems. They are not compatible, and it's a direct threat. In order to save our seeds now, this week, we're going to be bagging our corn, and then we'll have to hand pollinate every single ear of corn in order to avoid contamination from the GMO corn just 100 meters away. So these two systems are completely incompatible. But the joy, what I want to say is, we have a collective farm now. There are many immigrants in the United States, and they are suffering because of bad policies. Many of them have come to the United States because of NAFTA and CAFTA, and they are now in our communities trying to survive. Some of them are still sending money back to their home countries, and they have been uprooted from their ecosystems, from their communities, from their native cultures, the native way of eating. In order to make a tortilla in the United States, most people have to buy maseca. It's a big company that produces a kind of dried version of masa, dried masa, but it's got all kinds of additives in it, and it has a lot of GMO corn in it as well. But now that we have our own corn, and by the way, we grow about 2/3 of an acre of corn in collectives with about 60 families, and we produce about 3,000 pounds of corn each year. Where would you keep, if you had to store 700 pounds of corn, where in your home or something, where would you store it, do you think? Any ideas? We're still struggling with that problem. For a while, I was using a Volvo station wagon and just loaded up with 1,000 pounds in the back, and it helps to dry it completely. It's like a little greenhouse. But then the mice move in, you know, and we have a car full of mice and corn. The mice are in heaven, you know. So this is the kind of new agriculture that we're having to find new challenges. But that corn has become a nucleus for organizing our community. So we are making hominy, we're having big festivals, tortilla festival, tamal festival. We're having big pop-up dinners where we hand grind corn and distribute the corn. It's a wonderful instrument. It's a wonderful way of building community and bringing in all those cooks who haven't made their own pozole for a while, since they left Guatemala or Mexico, to share their knowledge how to use corn leaves to make tamales. Oh, there's so many things around corn that we have no idea. We people in the north. Corn is innate, right? We are the children of corn now. The more corn we eat, the more we become the children of corn, as the Mayans said we were, right? And so it's a great joy. This is resistance, but it's also community organizing. It's also empowerment. It's also restoration of our culture, of our cultures, the native cultures of this hemisphere. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you can be in contact with me, and we'll be very happy to have a dialogue.
I just love that idea of corn as a nucleus for community and joy. A wonderful thought. Where is our next? There we go. And then coral. Okay, here we go.
So I'm just going to speak really briefly before Coral from the National Farmers Union. My name is Lucy Starrett, and I work with the Canadian Biotechnology Action Network. And our work in resisting genetic engineering, we are exposing and directly challenging corporate control in agriculture. We do see corporate control as the root cause when we're looking at this issue of genetic engineering. And our analysis is that genetic engineering, you could call it genetic modification, that this technology facilitates corporate control. And this is helpful when we see these types of advertisements that companies are promising to give us a better apple, better than nature, a better potato. So one of the things we've done is really evaluate what are these potatoes, these apples, what's really happening here. It's been 20 years that genetic engineering has been introduced in Canada, in North America, and our organization has spent a great deal of time last year assessing the impacts and risks. Now that we have 20 years to document what's really happening here, and how did it happen? Who's behind it? These promises for a GM apple and a better potato, that when we're being sold genetically engineered products, when we're being sold this product to feed the world, this product to solve climate change, that we're being sold our future and it's going to be costly. And we also have committed to this resistance together and to building community in joy and optimism and building that positive community now when we're resisting corporate control. So resisting also this idea, this categorization of ourselves as consumers, and that as consumers we're taking action actually as people together in community, as people who are non-farming and farming, we can do that work together. And I just wanted to share with you our experience in Canada of success when farmers and people who are not farmers are able to find common cause or understand common cause, common perspective, that this is when we have seen the most success, is when we work in solidarity, and this is what the concept of food sovereignty does allow us, is that understanding of, if we're going to talk about food, we're going to talk about really where it comes from, how is it grown, and who grows it. And so in Canada, when we have done that together as consumers, as eaters, we have stopped, for example, Monsanto's first genetically engineered agricultural product, which was bovine growth hormone. That was not approved in Canada. In the US and Canada together, consumers and farmers stopped the introduction of Monsanto's genetically engineered wheat, one of the world's staples, wheats. Monsanto still wants it, that's a lot of money, and yet it was not introduced. Monsanto withdrew it from approval. And Canadians stopped the first genetically engineered animal, this genetically engineered pig. There is a genetically engineered salmon that's just been approved, but this is the company that's trying to sell it. They've now been bought by a larger company, because that's exactly what happens when you have a product to sell, AquaBounty. So one of the work that all of us do is exposing what's happening here, who's bringing these products forward in our communities. And as it happens, Prince Edward Island is where this company, AgroBounty, that's trying to sell the genetically modified salmon, that's where they're based. This is the facility that will bring you one of the most cutting edge technologies here into your plate. Not to be trusted, shoddy, dangerous work that's being done, and that's being resisted in Prince Edward Island and by other Canadians as well. So, just to say that one of the projects that we've undertaken is really this project that we have of the GMO inquiry, this investigation that we undertook. We have 6 reports that document what's behind this experiment of genetic engineering. What has it meant? And just to conclude that this is evidently very successful, because the direct challenge to genetic engineering as a problem in the corporate control of our food system has had a very real impact, that the self-described agri-food industry in Canada, across different types of food sectors, has self-organized to try and win back public trust in conventional agriculture. And explicitly, and some of you may have seen a video describing the challenge of all these consumers who are concerned about genetic engineering and concerned about pesticides, that we could see more regulation of genetic engineering. We could see bans on pesticides. This kind of challenge, conventional agriculture is feeling very keenly and are self-organized in a 25-year project to have us accept conventional agriculture, because it's so obvious to them that this is no longer a path that consumers, that people across the world and in Canada are accepting, that we're moving somewhere else and they are not a part of the picture. So I just wanted to leave you with that, and I'll pass it to Paul. Thank you.
I'm not going to talk very quietly.
So we started with an activist, this session with an activist, and we're ending with a farmer, and that's very deliberate, because we really want you to leave this room remembering the sort of key actor at the heart of this movement. So over to you, Coral, with the National Farmers Union.
That was not graceful, excuse me. And I'll introduce Mrs. Tennyson. He's the youngest member of the Via Campesina delegation that I was there with this weekend, or this week. He was in his first march yesterday, so it's really exciting. So he's all tuckered out, and I'll hope that he just sleeps through this. I did want to mention actually just first that I'm here on behalf of the National Farmers Union, but also we are a member organization of the Via Campesina, as well as Steve is part of that delegation. So, and being supported by our partner organization, Joignez-vous, that's the only other organization in Canada that is a member of the Via Campesina. So I've done a lot of work in conjunction with our international program through Via Campesina as well. I just wanted to give a sort of brief overview of the issues that the National Farmers Union has been working on over the past few years. A couple of years ago, it was introduced the Bill C-18. It was an agricultural growth act in Canada, sort of an omnibus farm bill that had come through and was actually adopted at that time. Part of that was that we were going to adopt the new UPOV 91, which was an amendment of the Union for the protection of new varieties and of plants, and that's basically is reflective of the plant breeders' rights, which is laws that are protecting infringement of copyright, essentially putting seeds in the realm of something that will be protected under copyright laws, and mostly seemingly to benefit the corporations who own the seed patents. So we're trying to work to bring that power back to the farmers. So part of our campaign on that, which again was unsuccessful in actually defeating the bill, but at least we got a lot of awareness out there, and we're still going to fight towards protecting our farmers, was that we were introducing Farmer Seed Act, which was, there's more elaboration on our website on nfu.ca if you want to see that. It's just sort of something that we outlined as a farmer-led seed act that could be adopted. And it hasn't really gone much place, but we'd like that to be something that kind of provides an outline for the movement. I think I was going to talk really about sort of a holistic approach to the movement to protect small farms and also peasant farming in Canada, as well as our food system. Just to say that I think I probably have way more to say than can be said in 5 minutes, and Tommy is kind of going over. Just that it's a very multifaceted approach. And I think I was going to start with the political. We do a lot of lobbying on government policy, on agriculture on all levels. We have locals that are lobbying for different policies in municipalities that are of benefit to farmers and growers. We also, again, are doing work on UPOV, which is related to a lot of trade agreements which are being introduced right now, including CETA, the Canadian-European Union Trade Agreement, the TPP, TTIP as well, and those also relate as well with the UPOV 91, because some of these trade agreements have written into them that they'll actually strengthen and expand the rights of the corporations to enforce measures for those who are infringing on their patent laws. So that's something really important. I think someone had a question earlier as to how trade agreements tie in with seed sovereignty and food sovereignty, and that's one way that they do. And I think all of those, it's very strategic on the part of the corporations and intergovernment organizations who seem to support these corporate measures that they are all interconnected and that it's very well plotted out. But I think that I'm trying to go off on a positive note though, and let you know that on the ground and at the grassroots level, there's a lot going on. So there's sort of this bigger government policy making theme of things. And then I think that we all take farming as a political act in the Farmers Union. And we're really made up of small, diverse family farms across Canada. So that's where we would like to see positive change happen in that realm. There's also the social aspect, which I think a lot of what Stephen was talking about actually, so I'm not going to go too much into that, but about community coming together and trying to support farmers and growers and urban farming and individuals farming and growing. And I think that's where we really can see a lot of positive change on the ground level. Also to have alliances as well, which we have with our farming organizations in Canada as well, alliances of the NFU, the Union Paysan, which we also do support their right to be recognized in this province as opposed to the monopoly that's been taken by the UPA. So I just wanted to allude to that as well. And then also that we work in the larger umbrella of the Via Campesina as well, which is a world organization of peasant farmers. So that's really important to support. We're also working with people like CBAN in lots of issues on seeds as well. And then there are farmer-to-farmer exchanges, which we're trying to promote and support as well through the work that we're doing. There's also seed growing cooperatives. There's a Northern Seed Growers Alliance that's sort of recently popping up. USC is an excellent organization that is promoting and supporting a lot of these initiatives, especially with the seed growing through the Delta Seed Initiative. So if you haven't heard of the Delta Seed Initiative, I would look it up. It's supporting all levels from education and sort of including children in the realm of seed growing and seed saving to the levels of grower cooperatives and education on growers on how to save and collect their own seed. So that's a very important aspect of it. I've actually used in my own education, I do education with children on food systems as well on my spare time. And I've used some of the kits that USC has available for educators on seed saving activities with children. So that's for 8 to 12-year-olds. Got my 2-minute mark, so I'm going to try to zoom through this. The other realm is actually going into supporting, well, actually, just to finish off quickly, is that we really need to, I think, support sort of the social aspect of farmers' mental health, actually. It's something that we don't talk about a lot, but it was something that was talked about in great detail this morning in reference to farmers in India and such that are sort of undergoing such great pressures due to losing farms, losing their livelihood, losing their lives really when it comes to corporations coming in and putting pressure on them. That also farmers in Canada are experiencing, I think, a similar level of depression and fatigue when it comes to fighting a fight that feels like an uphill battle all the time. So I think that's something that needs to be talked about as well. And then also supporting women in agriculture, being that we've recently done a new farmer survey, and I think as many people talk about, women, young women especially, are the new farmers in our country, And the majority of farmers coming into it are sort of between the ages of 25 to 35 and not from an agricultural background, maybe having children, I think, enabling our participation not only on the farm, but also in political arenas is something that's very important. So I'm thankful for the National Farmers Union and Union Paisano that do have space for youth and women and really encourage our participation to be at the meeting table. So that's a really important aspect of it. I would not be here really without that support. So, and then education through, as I said, the seed initiative, working in partnerships with our schools, where there are a lot of school food initiatives right now, and nutrition building initiatives where we're trying to educate youth and children, and that's not only on food systems knowledge and political knowledge, but I think on practical knowledge of gardening as well. A lot of educators now are introducing the garden as a way to learn science and math, and I think just having children plant seeds and plant the dirt is very, very important, because as our other crisis here is that we need more farmers. So I think the younger people are introduced and brought into the fold, the better. So that's a really important aspect of it. Yeah, so the practical knowledge and being passed down from generation to generation, as I think a lot of that was lost, but is being revived at this time. So yeah, educating the public, ourselves, going to farmers markets, talking to people on the consumer side of things as well, supporting your farmer and supporting the initiatives that they're involved in is extremely important. And I will just rush through to say, I think that resistance is sort of summing up all of what I've said, because I think strengthening the movement in a positive way and supporting farmers, supporting growers, and supporting seed saving is one of the best things that we can do to continue growing this movement. And one of the best things you can do is to grow seed and save seed and share it. And I think that we're doing that a lot more when there's numerous seed Sundays and seed sharing swaps that go on every year, and it's becoming really popular in the norm. So I think this is kind of the ground up movement that I'm trying to illuminate here, and I really look forward to the discussion afterwards as well. I think we've left a good amount of time to discuss the change that can happen from people in this room and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you just sold out, right? Good time. So it's what's being passed around right now is part of a campaign we have called I'm a Seed Saver campaign. So your comments on seed saving as a final comment are really well timed. Thank you. And please wear this proudly. It's reminding people, even if for some reason your job does not, or your work or your life does not require or involve a direct saving of a seed, if you're part of this food movement, you are a seed saver. You are supporting the values and the principles of food sovereignty. So please wear it proudly. And if you want to take an extra one for your partner or for a friend or for your child, please do so. So now is the opportunity to have some exchange and to hear some of your stories. I see my colleague there from Nepal. I see a colleague out there from Honduras. I see a colleague from France. All of you have also been part of work that is really essentially that political act that agriculture is. It is about resistance. So we would love it if you would share your stories, farmers in particular, and just looking at the questions that they wanted me to guide you on. But let's start with that. Let's hear what you would like to share with the group. So I saw a hand up right away, probably from France. Anybody else at the moment want to share some stories of resistance and taking back control? So while you're thinking about your comment, which I know isn't going to happen, si vous voulez commencer, oui.
D'accord. I will speak in English maybe. I don't know how the translation is. And I wanted to first thank all the speakers who came here because all the interventions were very uplifting, very interesting, but also very interesting, and give us good hopes for the future. I wanted to make just one remark and a call to people here. I noticed, and it was maybe not a coincidence, I would say that all the speakers, except the last one, and I want to thank her for this, but all the speakers have mentioned one word, all the speeches which were Monsanto. When we are talking about corporate control of food, mergers, and the threat to food security, we always heard the word Monsanto. And because of that, I wanted, without repeating my talk for this morning, and obviously there are more people now than there were, but still, I don't want to dwell too much, but I'd like you to see the poster which is just in front, which was the theme of my discussion this morning. In our common fight against corporate control, I wanted to mention this citizen initiative to create an international tribunal in The Hague in 2 months from now, which we will ask Monsanto, we will ask the tribunal whether Monsanto is guilty of crimes against humanity, crimes against nature, and ecocide. And I just wanted to ask all of you to go on the website, because I won't explain what I did this morning, but go on the website, see what this initiative is about, and I think it is a very key initiative to at least put a dent into all this corporate control, to show the whole world what these companies are doing, what they are doing to farmers, what they are doing to the environment, what they are doing to our health. And I think we need as much support as can be done. So I don't want to be too long about that, but please look at the poster, sign your support, help us to realize that, and I think we can have a very good first step in dismantling this corporate grasp on our food.
Do we still have our translators? Does anybody know? Anybody? Yes. Yes, okay, good. So I need to just very briefly recap so they can translate. So basically, a warm thanks to the presenters this afternoon who are, and even though talking about some very difficult trends, very uplifting as well. And then he just wanted us to know about this important sort of citizen tribunal that is occurring, the global tribunal that is going to be meeting in The Hague shortly, and there will be judges with international, sorry, there will be judges from the legal system who will look at the issue of take Monsanto, basically, the task on their various practices. And if you would like more information, the poster's here, and there is a website noted, I believe. Yeah, I think I remember the website was there. And you can get more information, but what's also required is more support. So whether it's by signing off or signing on, they're also looking for a broader group of judges. There are 3 judges, because I heard the talk this morning. And they want representation from all around the world. So if you have any ideas around that, our colleague, sorry, Richard, your name again? Arnaud is just over there, and you can talk to him after that. Some more comments or stories? Por favor.
Thank you. Susie. I want to share a story about my family because I belong.
I think this would be something that maybe you can speak right into the mic, and then we'll get the translation directly. And putting you on the spot.
Thank you. I want to share a small story about my family. I came from Honduras, and I belong for a family where a maize grower for more than 100 years ago. And maize is something that is very important, not only for food. In our culture, it's something spiritual in our communities. I'm from a Lenca community. And I remember that my grandfather used to do something that is very important. And now we are trying to promote this kind of activity in my job now. and tomorrow I can share more about that, but it's something very important because when he see that the maize field, it's the productivity, you know, the yield is coming down, he goes far away, you know, and find a new field of maize for some, you know, relative or some friend who gives crops, to give the crops and bring it and put it beside his field, and in that way he improved their own variety. He's a reader, you know, and that's the way that the other culture or indigenous community are developing, you know, or seeds or genetic resources. And it's important because in this context now, when we have GMOs around many places in our country, it's difficult that farmers could keep this, you know, tradition to do and improve their own varieties. Thank you.
Some more stories.
Susie, they're passing around this. We have them in French and Spanish as well.
Okay, so there are also those buttons in French. I mean. So, any other some stories, some comments, issues that you would like to raise, questions for the panelists? Okay, I see. Ah, there you are. Thank you. Sorry, it's very the light.
I just wanted to speak to what Steve. He started by asking who was a teacher or educator and who were gardeners. And I've done both. I'm a teacher by training, but I'm also an artist. And this last week in Toronto, I had a storytelling session with pre-kindergarten students about food. The stories were centered around food because I've always asked the question, especially to young children, where does food come from? And many children say food comes from the store. So I think as individuals, people who have listened to what has been said here, that's one place we can start from. We can share, we can save seeds, but also we have to start teaching young children where food comes from. And I think I really especially like the fact that we can work with them and show them they can have their science, they can have their math, counting how many seeds they put in the ground. They can observe and get their science minds going. They can observe if they put the seeds in a clear or transparent container. They can see the whole process of germination and how that happens so that they begin to understand that food comes from the soil, from farms, and it's people, it's human beings that produce that food. Chicken that they eat, you know, whatever, doesn't come from the store. It's processed, it's done, it's planted, it's grown by human beings somewhere, and then it comes to the store.
So, a really lovely comment about this is our colleague here is a teacher, a seed saver, right, and an artist and an educator. And in a pre-kindergarten class recently, that focused on food, he asked the kids about where their food comes from, and very often the answer is it comes from the store. And so just really stressing the importance of yes, we need to work on all levels, including the political level, but we also need to start with our own children and with children more broadly to teach them, to help them understand and connect to the soil and to the land, and to help them understand the importance of this, because they are, of course, going to have to carry that into the future. So thank you again. Your both interventions have been very thoughtful and much appreciated. Yes. Yeah, lights are better because I'm.
No, we're sorry, Susie, we can't do them because they're interfering with the translation. It's all on the same page.
Sorry, I stand this way because there's an actual really bright light shining in my face. Sorry. Oui, s'il vous plaît. Yes, please.
Oui, ma question, je vais la poser en français.
Oui.
Je me présente d'abord, je m'appelle Donald Chimangouy. Je suis congolais, mais je vis aux États-Unis, dans la même ville avec Stephen. J'ai été beaucoup interpellé, puis j'ai mis beaucoup d'attention à la dernière intervenante sur la question de l'intégration des jeunes femmes dans l'agriculture. Je sais que dans le monde, notre pays aussi fait partie aussi des pays dans le monde, mais je crois que dans mon pays, les femmes, les filles sont vraiment négligées dans l'intégration de l'agriculture. J'aimerais que, y a-t-il moyen qu'il y ait des communications et quel type d'organisation que nous pouvons avoir pour quand même parvenir à intégrer un peu nos femmes et nos jeunes femmes dans l'agriculture, parce que c'est vraiment important. C'était ma préoccupation.
Merci. Did that get translated for those of you who? Yeah. Okay, so I don't need to translate that. So who would like to answer that question around the issue of what kinds of supports are available for women, often in countries like Angola, who are often very much marginalized and really not supported. Congo, sorry. I thought I heard Angola. Congo. Excuse me.
No.
Congo. And aren't basically offered the opportunities that men are as male farmers. Please, Roy.
Well, I was just at a presentation this morning given by Joki from Kenya, talking about the Kilimanjaro movement, which involves women all over the continent of Africa converging on a national plan for supporting women and women farmers against the pressures and expropriation that they're facing of their land. And this is all coming together in Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. And we're presenting a charter subsequent to that later this year in Addis Ababa to the African Union. But if there's anyone from this morning's presentation, they would make the case for that. But there's something actually happening in Africa amongst women and minorities.
So I'll just repeat it for translation purposes. So in Kilimanjaro, there's a movement that's been developing called the Kilimanjaro movement in Tanzania, working and throughout Africa, working with women to promote their rights as farmers. And there was a very good presentation this morning that, is there anyone here that went to, besides Roy, that went to that presentation or that was a part of that presentation? Yes. So maybe you could speak with our colleague from the Congo a little bit about how there might be some connections. Other organizations like ours too do particularly deliberate work around getting women to be a core part of the agricultural programming that we support. And that's another way of approaching it as well in terms of any kind of agroecology work that we are making sure that women are key actors in that, not only as producers, but also in the decision making. And more, I think, of the progressive NGOs are really realizing that centrality of that role. Yes. It's hard for me. That's why if I'm not, just keep your hand up because at the back, further back, I don't see your hand up.
I'm a teacher also close to 30 years, ecologist. What I find children's experiences that last are not the ones that they get from the facts. The facts need to be absorbed by observation, but it's teaching a love of the land, the love of nature. You can give them all the facts and food pyramids and this, that, and the other that you want, but it's really by getting out there into the field, into the river, under the trees that really makes the difference. If there's not the connection, it won't happen. And that's something you really, particularly in urban areas, we have to really work hard on.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge challenge. Just sort of confirm what the other person was saying up front.
So she was just confirming what was said earlier about the importance of teaching children, but that it needs to be very experiential. They need to get their hands dirty. They need to feel the land, the water, the soil, the plants, and she's just sort of reconfirming that the importance of doing that. We often talk about this concept called nature deficit disorder, and there is a great worry that with the rise of a sort of another kind of way of communicating with each other through certain kinds of social media, that the kids are not outside playing in their yards. And I don't know, I grew up eating dirt, and I think, I think it probably helps with the flora in there. But we also just need to remember that there are key actors right from the beginning that we need to pay attention to. More questions? Yes.
Just since we're talking so much about seed saving, I just thought I'd mention really fast for at least the Canadians in the room who might not know, one of USC's partner organizations actually is called Seeds of Diversity Canada, and it is the oldest and largest seed saving exchange network here in the country. We have a growing membership that offers each other seeds free of cost every year. Anybody is welcome to join, whether or not you have experienced seed saving or even anything to share. There's always more seeds than we can all plant and people who need them. And so if anyone's interested in more information about that, I'd be happy to share it. But just to put it out there in our, it's a bit of a plug, I'm sorry, but the website is very easy to remember. It's seeds.ca.
So she was just telling us that about an organization, and it's one of the oldest seed, well, it basically is the first sort of seed saving organization in Canada called Seeds of Diversity Canada. They're a very close partner of ours, of USC Canada. We work with them on the seed initiative. There's lots of information on the website. It's seeds.ca. That will tell you about the important work they're doing. And I'm going to just add that there's a very good relationship with the National Gene Bank as well. That basically gardeners and farmers across this country are growing out and keeping the diversity that we do have here in Canada alive. So I would recommend that you look at that if you're interested in the seed side of this issue. Yes, Stephen. Yeah, much better than
Just wanted to mention that one of the main principles and practices of Via Campesina has been gender equity and gender equality in the whole governance of the whole movement. And it's been a very key, very important part of that movement. And the campaign against violence towards women has been a huge effort by Via Campesina and very important. I just also like to mention, I have a list here of Via Campesina participation in different events in the next couple of days here at the forum, and I have a few extra copies. So if you'd like to continue this conversation in other workshops, please get a copy.
Great, thank you. And while we're on other workshops, we have a little flyer as well on other workshops that relate to sort of the food and farming system. There's several, so you can keep one of those up as well. And there's some sign-up sheets circulating. I hope it's making its way around, which are helpful if you would like further information. The organizers, so this isn't just for US Canada, this is for the organizers of the conference, to keep you posted on all the really exciting things and important movements that are happening. Any other final thoughts from some of our presenters? Mamadi, did you want to say something? Oh, we have some comments.
Thanks.
Would you like to come up? Because it's easier than maybe.
I'm not selling the story for that sake, but just it was very enlightening presentations from all the distinguished presenters. Especially, I have a small, maybe to Carol, if you shed some light on. So this is the struggle we are having in all the countries. Especially like, I mean, we are in most of the country, like we have different policy spaces, and in many instances we are part of many policy kind of forums or instruments. We mentioned about Canada recently adopting this Reform 91, but Canada is also a signatory of IT, which is specifically has a very strong farmers' right from Egypt, where it says in Article 9 that farmers are.
Say what IT is in the treaty.
treaty, seed treaty, which is international treaty for plants and resources for food and agriculture. And it specifically says that the parties who are member of the signatory of the treaty has to enforce Article 9, which is to protect farmers' right of saving seed. But in the EFOP 91 contradicts with like farmers cannot save seed. So, and you also mentioned about the farmer-led seed law, Seed Act, which is the process. So, can you shed some light on that? Like, what does it mean, and how, like, especially farmers' union is like using the seed treaties provision of farmers' right can fight against the UCO 91. So
I think that will be our last question before we end our night.
Okay, well, I'm going to, I guess, illuminate my experience on the Farmer Seed Act in general, because I'm just not necessarily the technical person to ask about it, but I would say that you're right that there is contradiction in that, and that there even within this Agricultural Growth Act, there's allusion to terminology called farmer's privilege, which is interesting because we talk a lot about how it's not necessarily a privilege, it's a right, and that's where we try to highlight that. But I think that I would go to have a look at the Farmer Seed Act on our website at nc.ca. I believe it's under Save Our Seeds is the link to that. And that will give you more information. It's kind of just a proposal, and it's what we have a man named Terry Bainey, who's our former president, and he did a lot of the work with us on trade agreements. He likes to read trade agreements for bedtime reading, so he's more of our technical advisor in that realm, and as far as the legalities and how some of those contradictions could actually help us, I think, in the future, if it does come down to really fighting for our rights in a legal realm. So I think that's where we can go with that. So I know this was the end, but my one thing I forgot to mention in my presentation as well was that I really want to stress, and we really intend to work more in the National Farmers Union with indigenous food sovereignty as well in this country, and I think it's something that maybe wasn't recognized enough in our presentations today, being that there's not representation from that community, and we were in unceded Mohawk territory here. But that's just something I think that as well in the Via Campesina, we like to put a stress on being respectful of indigenous food sovereignty and indigenous culture as well. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very
On the deputy, that's it. Oh, Pat, I guess you want to have the last word?
Can you remind?
Can I just mention that you can hear me is that in terms of the seed issue of farmers' rights and the UPAW, there is an international conference being organized through the seed treaty in Rome. It will be held actually at the end of September in Indonesia. But it is an international need to try to look at how to expand farmers' rights. What's particularly important about this, the Canadian government is not playing up this importance of this meeting at all. And the key issue, one of the key issues around that conference is what involves Canada very closely, and should involve all of us from whatever country we come from. And that is that the proposals that are being negotiated are suggesting that we should dematerialize the seeds in the banks by simply providing genomic mapping of material to gene banks. So it doesn't have to exist in real life any longer. We don't need to save the seed, we can have the DNA representation of them in zeros and ones on the internet. And the control over that system is being proposed to help us all get through climate change is something called DIVC, Diversity Quest or something, DIVC. One of the leaders of that actually are Canadians. calling for the dematerialization of gene banks, and they have in writing from the University of British Columbia proposed that, in fact, this would be a method by which the seeds in the gene banks would be privatized by international seed companies. They're being challenged in this, and of course there's going to be a debate about this at the Farmers' Rights Conference that takes place in September in Indonesia. But it's a place where Canada, rather than supporting farmers' rights, is actually moving to undercut farmers' rights very drastically by finding a way around the system to surrender the sovereignty of the seeds, the patent control of the seeds to the private companies.
So Pat was pointing to the fact that there is a very important conference happening in September in Indonesia on the seed treaty, and a particular initiative required to challenge the Canadian government who are promoting the dematerialization of seed, and that is essentially, using storing the genetic code in the database. You don't really need to save the seed, you just save the genetic material, and there needs to be very strong opposition. And if you would like to learn more about that, and we would very much encourage it, please look at the ETC group's website and or contact them directly about that, because the Canadian government is actually a key promoter of this whole concept of dematerialization of seed, and it's a rather dangerous trend. Bien, je crois que maintenant on pourrait terminer. Donc un très très grand merci et à nous. Please remember to bring back the devices, and also there is some literature down here, including some material for sale around the Polish seed businesses.
Take care.